Hey, Hannah Mouse 1 here. It's no secret that I love Harry Potter, and recently I've been thinking about a character who I think gets a rougher time of it than pretty much any other character in the series, and that is the ever-beloved Professor Remus John Lupin. Because man, this guy's life sucks. Sure, Harry loses his parents, is raised in an abusive household, and gets into awful, traumatic, near-death experiences every other week. Sure, Dumbledore lives with the eternal guilt over his past of Grindelwald and the death of his sister. Sure, Snape was spurned by the woman he loves, who went on to marry and have a child with his schoolground bully before being murdered because of the information that he, Snape, passed on to Voldemort, forcing him to spend the rest of his life playing double agent and protecting the son who was a walking reminder of the person who tormented him as a teenager. But Remus's life is awful in every way to Sunday, and worst of all, it's hardly even noted or mentioned just how bad it is, and that's a tragedy that I just cannot abide. So let's rectify that and explore the life of Remus Lupin. So the tragedy in Lupin's life really stems from him being a werewolf, so that's where we should start with his story. From the origins of Wolfie McWolferson's name, Remus being a boy raised by wolves in the story of Romulus and Remus, and Lupin meaning pertaining to the wolf, you might think that his being bitten was destined from the day that his parents, the wizard Lyle and his muggle wife Hope, named him, but that's not the full story. Lyle also means wolf, by the way, so I guess wolf names were just a thing in the family, and Remus's affliction was just a tragic coincidence. But speaking of Lyle, he's actually really important to the beginning of this story. According to the Wizarding World website, he was something of an expert in magical creatures, especially with creatures such as poltergeists and boggarts. When the dark arts became prevalent in Voldemort's first rise to power, the increased threat of the dark side recruiting dangerous creatures caused Lyle to be given a job in the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, which he gladly accepted, and here Lyle encountered the werewolf Fenrir Greyback, who was suspected of killing 2 muggle children. The committee didn't have any solid evidence that Greyback was a werewolf, and Greyback was playing dumb, pretending to just be some muggle tramp. He successfully fooled everyone except for Lyle, who wanted to keep Greyback confined for 24 hours until the next full moon, but the other committee members mocked the suggestion and Lyle himself, causing Lyle to lose his temper and say 6 words that would change his life and the life of his beloved son forever. He claimed that werewolves are soulless, evil, deserving nothing but death. The rest of the committee sent Lyle from the room, apologised to Greyback, still believing him to be a muggle tramp, and one committee member went to wipe Greyback's memory, but Greyback overpowered him and escaped, Lyle's words still ringing in his ears, full of a burning desire for revenge. Remus was almost 5 years old when Greyback broke into his bedroom and attacked him while he slept, and while Lyle was able to save his son's life, he wasn't able to change the fact that Remus was now a fully fledged werewolf, and while Lyle would learn from Remus that being a werewolf didn't inherently make someone soulless or evil, as he'd previously proclaimed, that wouldn't change the fact that Lyle's sentiments were aligned with the general consensus on the topic, forcing Remus to face a world of prejudice and hate. The condition left Remus with a very rough, broken and lonely childhood. Every time anyone grew suspicious of his behaviour, how thin and peaky he got around the full moon, how he'd disappear for a few days each month, the family would move away, and even if he was in one place for any decent amount of time, he wasn't allowed to spend time with his peers in case he let slip about his condition due to his young age. With each full moon that passed, he became more dangerous and more destructive, Lyle needing to cast more and stronger spells each and every time. Remus was homeschooled, and any hopes of him going to Hogwarts seemed dashed upon the rocks, until one Albus Dumbledore showed up on their doorstep and offered Remus a place at his school, provided certain precautions be taken, such as the construction of the Shrieking Shack, a place in Hogsmeade full of special spells and enchantments with a passage right onto the Hogwarts grounds to give Remus a safe place to transform. And now we're entering the territory of information giving in the book, so you're probably a bit more familiar with this part of the story. Upon arriving at Hogwarts, Remus was sorted into Gryffindor along with James Potter, Sirius Black and Peter Pettigrew. James and Sirius were fast friends with Remus, drawn in by his kindness and quiet humour, which offset their own wilder personalities, and Remus's experience with society's biases made him empathetic towards underdogs, causing him to bring the awkward, bumbling Peter Pettigrew into the group, even if he was someone that James and Sirius might overlook. Overall, Lupin's school experience was a good one. He had a group of friends for the first time in his life and was hard-working and scholarly, becoming a prefect by the end of his school career, although he suspected that Dumbledore only awarded him as such because he hoped that Remus would be able to exercise some control over his best friends, a task at which he failed dismally. But that's not to say it was perfect. His school life was plagued by guilt on several fronts. His love for and fear of losing his friends caused him to ignore James and Sirius's bullying of Severus Snape, even though he disagreed with it, and to tell egregious lies about his monthly disappearances for over a year until James and Sirius figured it out. out. After they figured it out, James, Sirius and Peter all became animagi and joined him when he transformed to make these monthly torture sessions more bearable. But the memories of these risky excursions that seemed so exhilarating when they were young and thoughtless would plague Remus for the rest of his life. What if you'd given the others the slip and bitten somebody? A thought that still haunts me, and there were near misses, many of them. And this was compounded further by the guilt of betraying Dumbledore's trust after all the precautions that Albus had put in to accommodate his condition, as well as the knowledge that his three best friends had broken the law on his behalf by becoming unregistered animagi. This is actually a bit of a trend with Lupin's life. Every good thing that happens to him, especially involving connections with other people, always seem to be overshadowed by something negative, either because of his fear of hurting them or his fear of losing them. But the next major event in Remus's story is one of the most tragic in all of Harry Potter. I am of course talking about the night of October 31st, 1981, the night that Voldemort would kill James and Lily Potter and meet his own downfall upon trying to do the same to Harry. Any cause to rejoice at the downfall of Lord Voldemort was lost on Remus, who not only lost James that night, but to the best of his knowledge, Peter was also killed, Sirius being responsible for both of these deaths and a dozen others, and subsequently being thrown into Azkaban. In the span of 24 hours, Remus lost his three closest friends. The next 12 years weren't easy for Remus. Not only had he lost his friends, but the Order of the Phoenix had been disbanded, cutting another set of connections for the troubled wizard. He flitted from job to job, leaving each before his monthly absences could draw suspicion, barely scraping by and working far below his skill level. Even the invention of the Wolfsbane potion, which would allow him to keep his mind when he transformed, making his transformation less dangerous and less painful, especially without his three animagi friends to accompany him, brought little solace because it was too difficult to make and the ingredients too expensive for a man on such a meagre, inconsistent salary. And his prospects only seemed to worsen when Ministry official Dolores Umbridge passed some harsh anti-werewolf legislation that made the idea of any form of long-term employment seem virtually impossible. This was until he was offered a position that had a chance to be consistent because his boss was already fully aware of his condition, and because he would have a constant supply of Wolfsbane potion to make him safe upon his transformations. Albus Dumbledore approached Remus in 1993 to take the position of Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. Remus proved to be a gifted teacher, always sure once again to support the underdog with his extra support of Neville, and he even got to see James again in a kind, except the eyes. Harry had Lily's eyes and perhaps a fair amount of her empathetic and kind spirit, but Harry wasn't the only shadow of the past that Remus was haunted by. Not only was he forced to accept the Wolfsbane potion from Severus Snape, whose relentless torment he had failed to stop and who he, Remus, might have killed if James hadn't pulled Severus out of the Shrieking Shack when they were teenagers, but Sirius himself had escaped from Azkaban and was likely hunting down Harry, and again Remus found himself putting his fear of losing his connection and trust with Dumbledore over his better judgment, hiding the fact that Sirius could transform into a dog, allowing him to slink around undetected and to shun the effects of the Dementors, information that would have been invaluable in the manhunt. This would remain secret until the school year was almost at an end when Buckbeak the Hippogriff was due to be executed. Remus had a suspicion that Harry would sneak out of the castle to visit Hagrid, putting him at risk of Sirius Black. Given that he had hidden Sirius's status as an animagus, he felt obligated to keep an extra eye on Harry that night by way of the map that he and his friends had made during their own Hogwarts years, the one he'd confiscated from Harry earlier. And indeed, he did find Sirius following the Golden Trio that night. But also, no, it was surely impossible. How could Peter Pettigrew be with Harry, Ron and Hermione? Pieces fell into place. Of course, Ron had a pet rat, and while it seemed so impossible for Sirius's loyalty to be so false, Peter had always been less reliable. And that meant Sirius had suffered in Azkaban for 12 years for crimes that he was innocent of, and in his haste to get to the scene, the rising full moon slipped from Lupin's mind. Aside from a slight mishap, which resulted in Severus being left unconscious at the hand of the Golden Trio, the evening went remarkably well. Peter had been apprehended, the truth had been revealed, and they had all of the evidence that they needed to exonerate Sirius. But then he transformed, and his not having taken his Wolfsbane potion meant that he wasn't safe, that he lost his mind, and due to his carelessness, he allowed Peter to escape. Had put 3 students at risk of being bitten, and if it wasn't for a bit of time travel shenanigans, Harry and Sirius could both have been subjected to the Dementor's kiss. Again, Remus found himself plagued by guilt, and once Snape let slip about his condition, he was all too ready to resign from his position. However, Remus's existence between jobs only lasted for about a year, because after Voldemort's return, he was quick to join the newly reassembled Order of the Phoenix, as was Aura Alistair Moody's young protege, Nymphadora Tonks. Remus found himself developing developing feelings for the sprightly young witch, something novel to him because of his distancing himself from society and constantly moving around. His lack of experiences with women caused him to overlook the signs of her reciprocated affection and would only realize the feeling was mutual after he made a jealous comment when Tonks complimented Sirius's appearance. He's still handsome, isn't he? Even after Azkaban. He's always got the woman. You'd know perfectly well who I've fallen for if you weren't too busy feeling sorry for yourself to notice. Remus's delight at the realization was fleeting, as he had never allowed himself to humour the notion of a romantic relationship or starting a family in case he passed the condition to any children that he fathered, and subjected the unstable and miserable life that his parents had experienced onto his partner, so he pretended not to understand Tonks's clear advances and began to avoid her. Tonks wasn't fooled by the act and fell into a deep depression. Still, Remus had a decent excuse to avoid her because he spent much of his time living amongst other werewolves who were inclined to join Lord Voldemort. It was hardly a pleasant way to live, being underground almost literally, with werewolves disinclined to trust him because he'd attempted to live among other wizards. This would continue for well over a year, the only moment of note in the interim being the loss of Remus's closest friend Sirius at the Battle of the Department of Mysteries, until the tragic night of Albus Dumbledore's death, something which struck Remus harder than almost any other, except Harry, and perhaps Minerva McGonagall, Hagrid and arguably Aberforth. Dumbledore had been one of the few people who looked past Remus's condition, not ignoring it per se, but working hard to accommodate it, and allowing him to exist safely among his peers, be it as a boy at Hogwarts, a professor, or a member of the Order of the Phoenix. But the death of Albus Dumbledore was not the only tragic event of the night of the lightning-struck tower. Bill Weasley was also grievously wounded by werewolf Fenrir Greyback, and while Greyback wasn't in wolf form at the time, it seemed likely that Bill would have some degree of wolfishness as a result. Seeing Bill's fiancée, Fleur Delacour's disregard for this information caused Tonks to proclaim her love for Remus, and after a little pressure from the others in the room, Lupin was forced to admit his own feelings for her. And while Remus was happy to be in this relationship, the pendulum would often swing to guilt and fear in case the stigma of being married to a werewolf would tarnish Tonks's reputation and happiness. So when they did tie the knot, he kept the wedding as small as possible, marrying quietly in Scotland, with the only witnesses being a few wizards at the local tavern. And while this matrimony provided Remus some happiness, it would only last a few weeks before he would learn something that brought every fear and misgiving back to the surface. Tonks was pregnant. Remus was certain that the child would suffer the same affliction as he did, that the child would suffer the same inconsistent, unstable upbringing and the monthly torture that he did, that Tonks would be subjected to the torture of constantly having to move and watch her son in pain, that Hope Lupin had suffered throughout Remus's own childhood, and in a flurry of mindless, overwhelming self-hatred, fear and remorse he fled, leaving his pregnant wife on the hopes of another dangerous escapade with Harry Potter. However, the trio weren't as receptive as he might have hoped, and while Ron and Hermione remained cordial at the suggestion, Harry became angry, insulting and abrasive. "My father died trying to protect my mother and me, and you reckon he'd tell you to abandon your kid to go on an adventure with us? I never would have believed this. The man who taught me to fight Dementors, a coward." Enraged, the thin thread that Remus was hanging from finally snapped. He drew his wand on Harry, sending him flying across the room, and left Grimmauld Place in a sulk. The sulk extended for several hours, with Remus finding refuge in a corner of the leaky cauldron. But as the hours passed, he eventually came to terms with the fact that Harry was right. Had James and Lily not stuck by Harry to the bitter end at the cost of their own lives? Had Lyle and Hope not subjected themselves to years of misery, loneliness and instability on his own behalf? How could he run away from his wife and child at the chance of adversity that had not even yet arrived? Remus returned to Tonks and begged her forgiveness, and as a demonstration of the truly genuine nature of his apology, he would stay with her for the rest of the pregnancy, despite receiving requests from the Order of the Phoenix for his assistance. And over time, Remus would not only forgive Harry, but to feel massive respect and gratitude towards him for pushing him towards the happiest position he had ever been in. He would tell the radio station Potterwatch that we were all with Harry in spirit, and that Harry's instincts were good and nearly always right. And after Edward, or Teddy, Lupin was born, he would make his first major excursion from Tonks' side to find Harry at Shell Cottage and ask him to be Teddy's godfather, which Harry accepted. And much to Remus's relief, Teddy showed no signs of being a werewolf, and had in fact inherited his mother's much less and more practical trait, that being her shape-shifting ability as a metamorph magus. He would return to Tonks' side and take on the role of Teddy's father until the Battle of Hogwarts, when both Remus and Tonks went to stand in battle, knowing that between Tonks and Remus's both being half-blooded, Remus being a werewolf, Tonks being hated by her Aunt Bellatrix Lestrange, and all of this being applied to their son because of the Death Eater's value of bloodlines, their entire family would be eliminated if the battle did not go their way. And sadly, neither of them survived the fight. After months in hiding without a solid fight to sharpen their skills, Remus met his fate at the hands of Antonin Dolohov, and Tonks was killed by Bellatrix, leaving Teddy orphaned in his maternal grandmother's custody. But Remus's death fulfilled the resolution that he had made after Harry rejected his offer to join the trio on their adventures. He stuck by his family and ultimately died to protect them, and hoped that someday his son could come to terms with that. I'm sorry that I will never know him, but he will know why I died, and I hope he will understand. I was trying to make a world in which he could make a happier life. After his death, he was awarded the Order of Merlin First Class, and that made him the first werewolf ever to be awarded as such. The reason I wanted to make this video is that it struck me how much of Remus's life takes place off the page. Bill and Fleur's wedding was a big hurrah, but Remus's marriage reveal was about half a paragraph when they go to collect Harry before the Battle of the Seven Potters. We don't get any real references to Lupin as a parent, other than him having a photo of Teddy at one point, despite the fact that parenthood is a massively important part of the story and message of Harry Potter, and that Remus's shortcomings had been explored in the scene at Grimmauld Place without showing much of the redemptive side. And most egregiously, he's killed off page by a character that, despite having a recurring presence, was fairly forgettable. But his story was actually rather powerful, and I felt that it needed to be told. But apart from that, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Like and subscribe if you did. It lets me know that this is something you want to see more of. Let me know if there are any other characters you want me to discuss. I really like doing this and would love to do it again. They wouldn't necessarily have to be from Harry Potter either, just any franchise or character that you think is worth a deeper dive. Join the Discord, link down below, and I'll see you next week with another video. Bye!